Joining us now is Timothy Snyder, professor of history at Yale University. He's the author of the New York Times bestsellers on freedom and on tyranny. His new Substack essay is titled The Mump Regime. Professor, good to see you. Thank you for being with us. And I think this is a crucial point. It's not sort of frivolous and light. It's a descriptor of what's actually going on here. The idea that a couple of mornings ago, Elon Musk got up and tweeted that Republicans should not pass this very important piece of legislation, the only constitutional piece of legislation they are compelled to pass, because he didn't feel like it. No one's clear on why he didn't feel like it or what his beef was, but he says something and they do his bidding. It's very strange.
Yeah, I mean, it's very strange compared to what we expect or what's written in the Constitution, or for that matter, who Americans voted for. No American voted for Mr. Musk. It's not strange given the financial structure that we're in, where we have someone who plays a rich person on TV, which is Mr. Trump, who is being carried along by someone who is in fact the richest man in the world, and that's Mr. Musk. Mr. Trump has real debts and Mr. Musk has real money. And whatever threats Trump can issue, whether those are to primary somebody or whether those are lawsuits against media, those will be financed by Mr. Musk. So the debts are not just in the past, the debts are also going towards the future. So Musk is actually the stronger figure here. But at the same time, as you suggest, this is also a sign of conflict between the two men, and also a sign that Congress may realize that they want the United States to continue to exist as a republic, which is kind of the basic line that we're talking about here.
So there's two things at play here that might actually save democracy. One is the last point you just made, that there are some people, some Republicans in Congress who would like the United States to continue to operate as a republic. And the idea that the sheer incompetence we've seen in the last 48 hours tells us something. For all the money, for all the power, for all the control of three houses, three parts of the government that the Republicans will have, they couldn't get this small piece of business done easily.
Yeah, I mean, business is a crucial word there. People say, let's run government like a business. But, first of all, business doesn't have a whole bunch of different CEOs with different interests, which is what the cabinet is. And second of all, you don't actually want the government to be like a business. You want the government to govern so that businesses and non-governmental organizations and citizens can have normal lives. What we've got now is we've got someone who is used to having his will just be fulfilled, whatever that might be, second to second, moment to moment, who's now going to try to work that black magic on the federal government. And I think this is just a hint, just a whiff of the way it's going to go for the next 4 years.
So I guess the question is, if there's an element of incompetence at play here, which we've definitely seen in the last 48 hours or so, is that good or bad? In other words, bad for the country on the surface, but given that some of the agenda here seems to be to dismantle some of our democratic norms and practices, I'm almost hopeful that, wow, if this is what you guys have, this is the best you have, democracy may survive.
Only if people move into that gap, right? Because I think the most optimistic version is that there are people here who want to destroy the government for different reasons and in different ways. You have the people who want to break it because they want to pick up the pieces, which is Musk. You have people who want to change it so they can lock up political opponents, and that's Patel and Trump. And these interests don't always align, and they're not always going to align. But Democrats and people who want to live in a democracy can't just stand back and watch that. They have to name it, they have to give it concepts, and they have to talk constantly about how it could be better, right? I personally think there should be some kind of alternative cabinet, an alternative government, people who talk about what they would be doing if they held these positions. So that we're not just talking about catastrophe and averting it.
In fact, in the morning, I'm talking to your colleague, Joanne Freeman, who makes that point that this might be one thin slice that we should grab from sort of parliamentary democracies. The idea that the Democrats now need to take on the role of the official opposition. For every policy, there needs to be a counter policy. There needs to be an alternative, and it needs to be put forward in a productive manner. None of it may pass, but they need to act like this is what governing actually looks like, American people, so you can make a better choice the next time around.
Yeah, I mean, not only that, but I think actual people should say, well, look, if I were the department, if I were Secretary of Transportation or Defense, I would be doing this instead. We need to practice that, right? Americans need to be reminded that we do have good, responsible people who aren't going to behave like overgrown children, that we have people who know about the jobs, who have the skills, and who care about us. 6 months into this thing, this is all going to look a lot more chaotic and worse. And we have to have things to say at that point that are not just, hey, it's chaotic and worse. We have to be able to say, it could be a lot better than it is. That's where we'll have to be.
One of the things we're going to talk about in a moment is the affinity that Elon Musk seems to have for Russia. This is a serious. A lot of these things that this administration, the Trump regime does, can be undone and will be undone over time. This is a pretty problematic one. The position that this administration and this government might take toward Russia and Ukraine. This is obviously an area of your specialty. That one worries me a little bit more because there could be things that could happen there that are going to be very, very hard to undo in 2 and 4 years.
Yeah, I mean, it's a crucial bit of wisdom that we have all the way from the ancient Greeks forward, that oligarchs in one country are going to have more in common with oligarchs in another country than they are with their own people. And on Russia, we see that there are these resemblances, affinities, and also friendly relationships among precisely Musk and Putin and Trump. And those three men tend to like the same foreign politicians. When Musk says he likes the German far right, it's the same German far right that Putin wants. And you're absolutely right. At the moment, Ukraine is fighting a terrible, costly war. And in fighting it, it's holding back all kinds of terrible things. If we treat that war frivolously, if we put American power on Russia's side, which is what Musk clearly wants to do, and Trump sometimes hints he wants to do, we will be unleashing terrible things around the world with respect to nuclear weapons, with respect to China, with respect to stability generally. So you're right, this is not one we can just laugh our way through. And if we let the Ukrainians lose, there's no coming back from that.
Professor, at what point do people who validly had concerns about their pocketbook, about the price of eggs, about inflation, these are valid concerns. You cannot discount the fact that people, whether they made the right electoral choice or not, had those concerns. At what point does it dawn on some people that, but I didn't vote for the chaos. I didn't vote for the Mump regime. I didn't vote for RFK endangering my water supply and my milk supply and the clean air. Where does that happen? Is it just the chaos that drives people to say this wasn't what I wanted? Or are these really clear examples that I voted for something else? I didn't vote for this.
Yeah, I think some folks will go the way you're talking about, but other people will say, even if they didn't vote for exactly this, they'll say, I'm enjoying this. I'm enjoying the chaos. I'm enjoying the spectacle. I'm enjoying watching other people be humiliated. I'm enjoying watching other people suffer. I'm afraid there will be that too. And so once again, the important thing is to have something else, a third way, which is a positive representation of how things could be better than they actually are. So it's up to us in the media, it's up to us in the public sphere to not just to criticize, but to talk about how things could be better, might have been better, could yet still be better than they are right now.
I think that's a great idea. I'm quite happy to invest in that for the next couple of years or so. Professor, good to see you as always. The Yale University history professor Timothy Snyder, once again, giving us a roadmap and some ideas about how we actually get out of the situation that we're in.